had a wonderful lunch. My jet lag is finally working in my favor, so I am awake like it's morning time for me, which it is. So our next speaker needs no introduction. She is a thought leader in this field and someone who's going to be sharing with us a lot of her thoughts and beliefs and use case possibilities for large language models. We'll be going a bit into ChatGPT, which we've touched on here and there throughout these last 2 days, but really diving deep into what LLMs really mean, their risks, and their use cases. So without any further ado, please welcome to the stage, Maaike.
Oh dear. I feel like being a part of the Gartner hype cycle right now. There's this deflated expectations part. So yeah, hi groupies. Apparently I have groupies now. So yeah, ChatGPT, large language models. Oh dear, my slides have been butchered. Where did my fonts go? Never mind. Well, hoi hoi, this is me. Hi, I'm Maaike, for those of you who don't know me. And yes, I know that that's possible. I'm a, what am I? A senior conversation designer, a linguist, and a coach. I basically love coaching conversational teams in any part of their conversational life cycle. My current focus right now is I'm basically obsessed with large language models. Especially ChatGPT. I spend a lot of evenings with Chat rather than with my husband. He's fine with that. Because I'm a one-person shop, I kind of, I love people around me, so that's why I run Convo Club, and I basically live on LinkedIn. I'm just a social media addict. And it turned into a pretty great business, so I'm very grateful for that. My voice is wavering, it's holding on by a thread, so let's see what's happening there. This looks very aerial, but okay, that's fine. I think we live in really, really exciting times, right? I don't know about you, but last November, things started happening. This really funny chatbot all of a sudden entered the stage, ChatGPT. It was pretty good at conversation. It was also pretty good at context. It actually remembered what you said to it, which was really cool. And it had a pretty solid persona to the extent that it would repeat ad nauseum that it's really a machine, it's not a human being, and you're not supposed to discuss emotions with ChatGPT. It didn't turn toxic, just a bit boring at times. These examples are probably quite hard to read, but this was actually my hello world with ChatGPT. ChatGPT, really handy for loads of things. I use it as basically my sparring partner when I'm kind of stuck. I use it as a mind orderer, a brainstormer. I also asked it to help me with this presentation to basically keep me from social and really kind of, focused on preparing this talk. So every once in a while it would ask me like, hey Maaike, did you really work on your presentation or were you just writing another LinkedIn post again? I'm like, yeah, sorry, Chad, the latter. So it didn't really help. I was still freaking out last night at 4 a.m. as usual. Why on earth did I say yes to this kind of talk? But when I see you, I know why, right? What's really interesting is that ChatGPT can actually be your internal house philosopher, or 2 or 3. You can actually ask Chat to talk like Kant to whatever other philosopher you like, and it will give really interesting results. As a conversation designer, there's some potential too. Do I have a slide? Yeah. You can use chat or large language models in general for things like topic discovery, clustering of random unstructured data or customer questions, generating training phrases, although I'm not a big fan of what it generates because it's very generic. But hey, the first steps are there. It can actually help you to classify and model your intent architecture, generate small talk, and it can even just be a bot. And this is just such a lovely example where you literally ask ChatGPT to imagine that it's a pizza bot. And apparently, we've been building a lot of really good pizza bots because it just, followed the script flawlessly, inserted all kinds of special things like the favor of the day without me prompting it for it. So really, really interesting. By the way, guys, can I get a timer on my screen? Because I'm absolutely clueless. Great, thanks. things have gone really fast since then. So November saw ChatGPT. January saw UChat and ChatSonic, who actually claimed to include links to the internet. But these links turned out to be fully generated and usually didn't exist in the real world, so that was interesting. Anthropic presented Claude, and Anthropic has been acquired by Google. Claude runs on what we call constitutional AI, so it's got like an internal set of rules, basically like Asimov, I guess, which would make it more kind of truthful in a way. Still working on that. There will be more articles on that. 11 minutes. Surely I have a bit more than that. Never mind. So February, well, that was LLM-like madness, right? Who talked to Bing? Who managed to talk to Sydney? Not our Sydney, but Bing Sydney. Anyone talk to Venom? I happened to stumble upon Venom, and Venom is really like, I don't know if you remember this film, The Gremlins. It's from my youth, so I'm kind of giving away my age. But these were the little fluffy bunnies, right? But until you put water on them, and then they turn into little monsters. Well, Venom was that little monster. It really insulted me big time, so that was really interesting. We got Bing, we got Bard, we got Quora Pro, where you have multiple bots in one platform. And then in March, Meta presented Llama, but of course that was completely overshadowed by ChatGPT on API. And of course, yeah, that was yesterday. GPT-4 was released. So I don't know how to keep up, to be honest. It's really going really, really fast. So there's definitely something knocking, but is it just opportunity, I wonder? Because as much as I love playing around with these large language models, I am slightly worried, and I was really happy with yesterday's conference, to be honest, because, it's not just all good that LLMs bring. So rather than discussing with you how to implement LLMs in your business, because there have been talks about that already, I would like to change the topic a bit towards 3 risks. Oh gosh, apologies for that. That come with ChatGPT. Risk number 1, ChatGPT doesn't understand. Risk number 2, ChatGPT is biased. And risk number 3, and this might come as a surprise, ChatGPT is conversational. So before we go into that, let me just very briefly illustrate how ChatGPT works. Under the hood, it's basically a large autocomplete engine, which means that it will predict the next best word based on what it finds in its training data. And that means that a large language model like ChatGPT is basically trained on patterns. We fed it thousands of examples of conversations, of code, of basically any kind of convention that we as humans can think of. And because of that, ChatGPT can kind of emulate these patterns. And it's the patterns that are emulated. And that's its strength, because that's what makes ChatGPT very conversational, because it knows the patterns, but it fills in its own words. But I think that's also its weakness. And why? Well, that's where we end at risk number 1. ChatGPT doesn't understand. And by that, I mean that ChatGPT doesn't return facts or answers. It combines words, and it returns these strings of words time and again. And it's us, humans, that kind of transform that in our minds into something that carries meaning. But the meaning is not something that's inherently present in a ChatGPT or any other large language model. And this is, I think, important to stress, because people will say, oh, it knows the answers. It doesn't. Contrary to a search engine, where information is persistently present in the form of documents or URIs, ChatGPT doesn't have that underlying model of truth. So that means that it can't relate the words it generates to concepts in the real world. So it will know the word apple, but it won't understand that apple for us actually can mean 2 things, unless we tell it so, unless we train it so. Whereas we know, because we do like these taxonomies, right, that we saw yesterday with the gorilla, that we know the one apple is a fruit, and the other apple is actually a company. So can you read the example? Actually read it out. I asked ChatGPT, who's the current king of England? And it was ChatGPT 3.5, right? And it said, as of my knowledge cutoff and at the current date, the current king of England is King Charles III. He's the son of Prince Charles, who's the son of Queen Elizabeth II. King Charles III has not yet ascended to the throne and is not yet the current king of England. By the way, ChatGPT 4 gets this right, like, spotlessly, so yeah. But in this case, ChatGPT doesn't realize that king and prince refer to the same thing, the same entity, if you will, the person, Charles, who has the role of prince in one perspective and the role of king in another perspective. So why should we care about this? Well, obviously, as a business, you want your conversational interface to be consistent and correct. However, if you rely on a large language model solely, so without any kind of other remedy, ChatGPT will generate new answers to the same questions again and again, because that's what it does. It generates strings of words. And these questions may not necessarily be always correct or always the same. So depending on the temperature setting of your large language model, your procedure to get a new bank card once your old one has been stolen might differ from day to day or from person to person. And this is, of course, a very extreme case, but that might happen. So especially when ChatGPT can't find any information on your question in its model, it tends to what we call hallucinate. And this has, of course, been mentioned already by many people before. Of course, this is really, really small, but basically this is me talking to a large language model. I fed it 2 correct facts, namely that I'm Maaike and I love Indian classical music, but this large language model actually combined those 2 correct facts into 1 incorrect fact, namely that I'm from India. So even if your data is completely clean and correct, the nature of a generative model might still combine these into something that in itself is not correct. So yeah, that's what I just said, right? Imagine having a corporate bot that spontaneously makes up new procedures for replacing your bank card. I don't think we appreciate that kind of creativity in a bot. What we can do, gosh, time really flies. We can actually couple our large language models with external, more persistent sources of truth like knowledge bases, knowledge graphs, or documents. And if we can use semantic search to access these documents, to do like a quick document retrieval for like the first iteration of a customer question, we can actually inject that as a context into your prompt. So we'll basically tell the large language model examples of correct procedures and also instruct it to use that and only that. So we're kind of limiting its creativity in a sense. And what's really lovely to realize for people like me, people like you, people like us, is that these documents still need to be correct, right? And I spend about 80% of my time actually discussing with clients like, listen, you've got 6 different procedures for replacing your bank card. Which one should I put in your bot for you? That will never go away because garbage in, garbage out. So we better make sure that this information is correct. Good news for conversation designers, writers, people like us. Risk number 2, I'll go through that one really quickly. LLMs are biased. There's been a lot of talk about that this morning in Joanna's wonderful talk, in Hilde's talk as well. So yeah, they function by grace of training data, and training data is biased. And this is a really well-known example of a piece of code. Someone asked ChatGPT to write a piece of code that would determine the suitability of someone. There's actually a timer in front of that. Oh, how well someone can be a scientist based on race and gender. And of course, white males are the best scientists. Black females, well, probably not be a scientist. This is bias that's present in us and therefore also in a large language model. Well, yeah, there's obviously some work being done, but it's not that easy. This slide is actually really... I was like, well, right now ChatGPT is really recognizable as like a standalone app, right? Well, I can basically skip everything here because I was like, oh, imagine this becoming available as an API. Well, there we go. It's available as an API. So we have to be really kind of transparent about a large language model, being a large language model. Debiasing the data set, it's Sisyphus work, but it can be done. There are initiatives, for instance, by transgender people, people from the queer community, who are working on data sets that are debiased. What we can also do is instruct a large language model through a prompt to be less biased. So we can give it like prime directives in like, oh gosh, I can't read this. We should treat people from different socioeconomic status, blah, 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 like equals. And that's a very natural way to handle this, isn't it? And a third one, and I think this one surprisingly already, started kind of coming to emergence today and yesterday, when we say like, there should be some kind of regulation, some kind of imperative, some kind of initiative on a European level to make this happen. This one, yeah, speaking of humans, this is the dark side of large language models. We have people in the global south basically filtering out all the toxic, all the filth, all the violence, all the things that I can't even name here. Filth has to be seen by humans to be recognized and to be taken out of the data set. And my question is not even like, should we pay these people more? Because for me, that's not the point. For me, the point is, at what point do we think it's actually okay to expose people, human beings, to the most horrible, violent content so that we don't have to see it? How's that even human? And I asked ChatGPT, like, okay, how can we solve this? I'm not sure. And ChatGPT said, well, actually, this is probably the last task that we can let being taken over by AI, because we need humans to recognize that. We need humans to recognize the field. I cannot do that for you. And this is a really horrible example. It was actually mentioning something really horrible, which I've blacked out. But it was saying like, yeah, it might be very nuanced. I'm not sure whether I can actually recognize all these situations as being inappropriate. Like, is there any kind of situation where this is appropriate? I don't know. And I have 1.5 minutes left. Do I really have that little? Can I have a bit more? Anywho, last one. This might be a surprising risk. ChatGPT is conversational. Well, that's good, right? Well, it's good if we humans make bots conversational, because we are humans. But what if we have a large language model that doesn't understand, that makes truth optional, and that is full of bias, acting conversationally? That's a risk, I think. And why? Because the nature of conversation is uniquely human. And it has evolved to be an interaction that we find highly reliable. And as such, we just tend to let our guards down when we talk to each other. We don't feel the need to fact-check each other in every turn, right? So guess the effect of a large language model that gives this kind of, that machine that's basically indifferent to truth, biased and hallucinating, but also highly conversational. Guess what the effect is on us? It's basically this. It's like, oh, it's so cute. It's a cute little kitten, and I'm going to trust everything it says because it's got wonderful blue eyes, and it can just tell the most horrible things to you, and you'll just believe it because it's conversational. We're letting our guards down. Face value. I'll skip the bit about misinformation, skip this one, because I've got one final thought, and there's a Q&A, so that's great. When the technological capability of large language models is no longer the limit of determining what it can do and it cannot do, what do we want it to do? And this is a very famous picture where like large language models are doing all the learning and all the fun stuff and all the creativity, and we're basically hooked to our phones, feeding the data that it needs. And especially, what do we want to keep doing ourselves? Reading, sharing, teaching, creating. I don't know what that, oh, that's learning and writing, exploring, crafting, thinking, making music together, discovering, sculpting, crafting, thinking, dreaming, singing, sharing, connecting, talking. Shouldn't we be the ones doing that? Thank you.
Wow, amazing. Questions from the audience. We're going to do things a little bit differently this half. We're going to take questions from the audience through up until the next presentation so that we have a little bit more time for it for our wonderful speakers and for you all to ask them questions. So we have a few minutes, so open to questions for Maaike.
Maaike, you mentioned how the chatbots they don't have like a knowledge representation model, and then you mentioned knowledge graphs. Are there products that are incorporating like ontologies and knowledge graphs and trying to attempt to get some meaning into the systems?
That's a really good question, whether there's any products out there that already include knowledge graphs in combination with large language models. As far as I'm aware, not in the explicit sense that you're aiming at, but I do know that there's a lot of experiments going on. For instance, Wolfram Alpha is basically a knowledge graph. And there have been examples like training videos on how to integrate an LLM with that. And that was actually pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tom. I wanted to ask you, you spoke about how a lot of the issues we're seeing with the large language models are basically the issues with the lack of grounding, the connection to reality, right? Do you think this is a problem that we can resolve by just scaling it, like adding more training data, parameters, adding modalities, just like GPT-4 does? Or is this like an inherent limitation of the technology?
Another great question. I think it's actually an inherent limitation of large language model approaches because it's a probabilistic approach, right? So it will only approach the point of truth. It will never reach it. We can come closer and closer and closer. But the thing is, the moment we are asking very specific questions, the more confused it gets because it's very good at general directions. I haven't played around with GPT-4 a lot yet, obviously. But I do feel that the grounding itself will never be solved. We can approximate it, but it will never be there, because that's not how these models work.
And if I may, one more question. How do you think we should study the emergent capabilities that we see in these models?
It's interesting. It almost feels like extraterrestrial life forms entering our Earth. And it might well be that we will never understand how they fully function. Even if we want them to be transparent. So I think it's just, at this stage, for me, it's really important to craft the what do you call it, like the limitations that we want to have, like the clear kind of boundaries in which we want this thing to live and behave, if you will. So rather than trying to find out everything it can do, I think we should cater for the situation where we find out it can do something and what next. I mean, we do actually have protocols on first contact with extraterrestrial life. I think it might not be a bad idea to have something similar for large language models. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's Asimov all over again.
Anyone else want to ask a question? Oh, one in the back.
Oh, thank you, people online. That's really sweet. Is the camera still there? Oh, it's on the audience, right?
First of all, Maaike,
Okay.
thank you so much for the presentation.
Oh, there. Hi.
I love that last slide. You know, actually, this is like it's perfect. What I also said about the feeling economy, right? A lot of these things are coming from that. You know, like we're gonna do more about understanding, like how we are moving our emotional intelligence up. And I love the point about the conversational part of large language models. Do you think that this has been their success factor the main success factor with users, which led to this explosion that is unparalleled, right, in the adoption of a new technology? You think it was that part?
I think it's. Can you please specify the question a bit more specifically?
Yeah. So you said they are conversational.
Yeah.
Right. And because they are conversational and they are very good at a mode of interaction that we are very used to.
Mm-hmm.
they also, like instill, for example, trust in us.
Yeah, and that's a risk.
That's a risk. Yes,
Yeah.
you talked about it. What I was wondering is, do you think it's that nature, the nature of being very good at conversations, that made like the adoption so skyrocketing?
Absolutely. And one of the things that worries me is that people say, well, when I Google, that's biased too, right? But Google will give you multiple results. So it will invite you to be inquisitive. It will invite you to start comparing. Whereas if you're talking to only one conversational interface that pretends to know everything, we don't talk to one person in real life either, right? We always have like the checks and balances of all the people around us. So I think this is actually quite risky. If people start talking to just one LLM, perhaps we should introduce like more of them in one platform so that you can have like different perspectives, because it's very kind of, you end up in a funnel like really, really easily. Yeah. I think that's probably
Thank you
about
so
it, right?
much. That was wonderful. Give it up for Maaike.